Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach. And this is episode number 125. Hey, before we get started today, I'd like you to know that I want to get to know my audience better, and I would enjoy having a one-on-one conversation with you about 10 minutes over Zoom. If you'd be interested in that, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/coffee talk, and you can pick a date and a time and schedule a 10-minute Zoom call with me one-on-one. I look forward to hearing from you. In this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Yug Varma, who's a microbiologist and a microbiome and skin health expert. So we're talking about skin health in this episode, but you can't help but talk about gut health at the same time because the two organs are very, very closely related. So the things that we do to support our gut will also support our skin health as well. And if you have a teenager that's concerned about acne, man, this is a great episode because we talk a lot about what is the true cause of acne and what you can do about it. So it's a great episode. I encourage you to listen to the whole thing. Today we have on the show Dr. Yug Varma. Dr. Varma has more than 10 years' experience in microbiome research. His mission is to change the way we treat chronic bacterial diseases. And he's here today to talk about skin health. Dr. Varma, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on. I think we can have a great conversation. You know, the mission of the show is to help people maximize their health potential so they can look and feel their best at any age. And of course, we all want our skin to look good and youthful and serve its the largest organ in the body to serve its purpose well. So just tell us a little bit, like 35,000 foot view of what you're doing today.
Yeah. So, as a scientist, my mission for the last several years has been to change the way we treat chronic bacterial diseases. What that means is that, a number of diseases are caused by one bacteria and they affect our microbiome. A lot of your audience probably know what the microbiome is, but the way I think about it is that the microbiome is like this invisible rainforest that lives in our body. It's invisible because its trees are made up of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and these microbes form this community that we call the microbiome. Just like a rainforest, it's incredibly diverse, and its diversity and its balance is its strength. So, your skin your skin microbiome may look different from my skin microbiome, but when we're both healthy, our skin microbiomes are in balance, right? When you have a chronic bacterial disease, one bacteria grows out of balance and causes an imbalance. And this is picked up by our body, usually by our immune system, which causes inflammation, and that drives the disease. The solution, as you might imagine, is to get back to a balanced state, right? Go back from imbalance to balance. And so we've been using this foundational technology called bacteriophages in order to do that, as opposed to technologies like antibiotics, etc., which, although very powerful in some cases, do not serve us well in chronic bacterial diseases because they kill all bacteria. So it's kind of like having an invasive species in a forest and burning down the forest to deal with that.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I want to get into more of the forest that lives on our skin in a minute here. But first, I'd like to start off with, I believe that the gut health has a lot to do with our skin health because the gut, the alimentary canal from the mouth all the way down to the anus, is designed to, of course, digest food, but it also protects us from the outside world. Even though it's inside the body, it's still protecting us from the outside world, from the things that we drink and eat and put down that pipe. So in the same way, our skin functions in a very similar fashion, that it protects us from the outside world. So what we do to support gut health will also support skin health. So one of the most important things we can do to protect our gut health is to avoid antibiotics when we don't need them. So could you talk a little bit about what antibiotics can do and how destructive they are to our gut microbiome?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start by saying that antibiotics have been a huge public health good over the last 100 or more years since they were invented.
Sure.
And they've helped prevent a lot of unnecessary death from what used to be or what is now routine infections and so on.
Right.
However, the overuse of antibiotics is really something that we should caution and protect against, because especially in the last 10 or so 15 years that microbiome research has really had a huge amount of output. It's shown that we used to think that all bacteria are bad, right? And just clean every surface, sanitize everything because bacteria are the enemy. Now
Right.
we know that it's a much more subtle, much more nuanced version of reality where
Yes.
there are a lot of bacteria that are very good and they live in our body and are actually essential for our health.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and so yeah, the overuse of antibiotics or the misuse of antibiotics can lead to a lot of what's called dysbiosis, which is again an imbalance in your microbiome. And the way that affects us is by using antibiotics is kind of like dropping a bomb on your gut microbiome, right? So you wipe out everything again, that kind of forest analogy, you're burning it down.
Hmm.
And sometimes, which will be familiar to more people than I think we're aware, um, people have the experience of, oh, I had this like stomach bug, and then I got these really, really strong antibiotics. I took it, kind of solved the problem, but I was never the same since then. Like you,
Right.
you just have this imbalance. Your gut is more sensitive, or it's never kind of quiet. It's always kind of a little bit it has a little unrest, and
Right.
that is basically a readout of the fact that you've changed your microbiome and you knocked it off its balance enough that it's never regained it again, and the consequences of that sometimes can be quite drastic and devastating for people where C. diff infections can or Clostridium difficile can take hold, and that really ruins your quality of life over the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that delicate balance between good bacteria and bad bacteria and yeast as well really helps to support our mucosal barrier, which is super important in avoiding conditions like leaky gut. We've all seen a dog drink water out of a dirty puddle and not get sick. Well, how can they do that? It's because they have a super strong mucosal barrier and it protects them from the outside world. So the same is true for us. We have a mucosal barrier. It's not as strong as a dog or an animal, but it's there, and we want to support that and help our gut do its what it's designed to do, and that is digest food, assimilate nutrients, and allow nutrients to pass through. But we don't want large proteins passing through. That we call that leaky gut, and that can develop all kinds of issues with chronic inflammation, and systemic inflammation in the body is responsible for all kinds of health issues. So it's a really, really important topic to talk about supporting our microbiome, both inside and outside the body. So let's talk a little bit more about what's going on the skin surface. Could you just say a few words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everyone or most people are very familiar with the idea of a gut microbiome, that there are a lot of good bacteria there. And then we have to work hard to kind of maintain that balance and sometimes, or I would say regularly, supplement with the probiotics, right? And that is why we eat yogurt, fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, etc.,
Yes.
that have live active probiotics that can support our gut. Um, just like we have a gut microbiome, we also have a skin microbiome. And the estimate is that there are about three bacteria for every human skin cell that we have. And so, although overall the skin microbiome in counts is less than the gut microbiome, the ratio in which it exists to skin cells is still pretty impressive. What are they doing there? They're doing something really, really important. And your skin microbiome changes over time in many predictable and some unpredictable ways. But in general, your skin microbiome, just like your gut microbiome, acts as sort of a sentinel and as a kind of sensory mechanism outside of our own cells, right? So what they're doing is they're occupying space. Someone actually made this analogy that's I think is really, really good. Think of your skin as a large, huge parking lot, all right?
Hmm.
And your skin microbiome is cars that are parked in that lot. Now, there are bad bacteria or bacteria that shouldn't be on your skin, right? Because you're always touching things, you're touching surfaces, you're touching soil, you're touching dirt, you're touching all sorts of things that have bacteria on them. And that bacteria can potentially grow on you when it's not really supposed to.
Right.
So if all of your the spots in your parking garage aren't occupied by good cars, good bacteria, then a bad bacteria, a bad car can come and park in an empty spot, and you don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so the job of your skin microbiome, of the bacteria on your skin, the microbes, is to really occupy those niches, consume those resources, and kind of box out the bad bacteria that might grow. And as a microbiologist, it's just really impressive to me. It seems almost miraculous that on a day-to-day basis we don't have all sorts of things growing on our skin, because our skin is really like the organ by which we largely sense and experience the outside world, right?
That's right.
Through touch, through temperature, through pressure, it's all coming in through our skin. And because we are sort of have this compulsive need to touch things and pick things up, we can't do without it. It really serves a very important function that I think we take for granted every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think another way of looking at that is if you are taking care of your lawn, if your lawn is sparse and the grass is weak, it gives room for weeds to show up and start to grow. The best weed control is to have a nice, thick, rich, hardy lawn with grass that's healthy. So the same could be said for the microbiome inside and outside the body, and it's a super important topic. And I'm thinking that you would love to talk about how this relates to acne. And I know there's a lot of listeners here that have children. People in the Natural Nation have kids, and I have two teenage daughters right now, and they're concerned about acne. And of course, we try to do the normal things like limit your sugar intake, reduce stress, those kinds of things. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good place to start there is what causes acne, right? Because once we understand the root cause, then we can take steps towards addressing it.
Sure.
So, acne obviously is a complex condition, but fundamentally it is driven by the colonization and overgrowth of one bacteria on our skin. This bacteria is called Cutibacterium acnes, or C. acnes. Now, you have C. acnes on your skin. I have C. acnes on my skin. Pretty much every teenager and adult listening to this podcast has this bacteria on their skin. Obviously, we all don't suffer from acne, right?
Right.
And that is because, again, this bacteria is meant to be on our skin. But it is when it grows out of balance and causes an imbalance in the microbiome that the immune system picks up on that. And because it's such a dominant member of your skin, the skin is like, no, 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 you can't have overgrowth to this amount. And it sends out inflammation to battle this overgrowth. And that inflammation is exactly what acne is. It's the pimples and zits that's on our skin. Now, as you mentioned, things like sugar and diet, things like stress,
Hmm.
even things like genetics and hormones are an integral part of acne, and
Sure.
they figure into acne. But there are secondary causes. So, for example, diet can be a trigger for people. And again, not all people have diet as a trigger for acne, but some people do. Some people, it could be sugar or spicy food or oily food. But when you have your trigger food, what's happening is your body responds or may respond by increasing the amount of oil or sebum that these glands on your face produce. Now, this oil is the food, the primary food for C. acnes. And when C. acnes sees more food, it grows more and causes an imbalance. Similarly, for stress, right? When you're stressed, you're sweating, you're producing more oil, and the bacteria feast on it and overgrow. Hormones, your hormonal cycle dictates the production of oil on your skin, and again that drives bacterial overgrowth. And finally, with genetics, some people have oily skin, some people have dry skin, some people have large or small pores, and that is basically the growing conditions for these bacteria that are varying. And so, again, some people think, oh, well, if the oil is the food, then let's limit the oil. But the oil production, which is natural for our body, also has a very important role to play in our skin. It keeps it hydrated, it provides a moisture barrier, and it prevents things like premature aging, fine lines, and wrinkles. So depriving our skin of that oil is also harmful, which many products for acne do.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Well, just let me interrupt you real quick there. When I first started getting into natural and holistic health was back in the 90s. And back then it was the craze was low fat everything. We wanted low fat this, low fat that. We substituted with sugar and salt and other
Mhm.
chemical flavorings, and it was. We've now learned the hard way that those things are all harmful to us, and we want to consume healthy fats because our body really, really needs that and thrives on it. And what you're talking about here is really resonating with me because a lot of people, well, not a lot, but some people still believe that we need to avoid fat at all costs, and that is just absolutely not true, is it?
Yeah, you're so right because our body requires a comprehensive set of nutrients, and removing an entire class or overcompensating from one class to another, whether on one side it is a low carb diet or on the other side things like keto or Atkins where it's very high fat but removing carbs, is ultimately, I think, over the short term, or for some people with a very unusual condition, it may work, right?
Hmm.
But for over the long term, I think having a balanced diet with healthy fats, a good proportion of them, right, is really necessary for the long term for us to maintain a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle. And this is, also reflected in the fact that, if you think about blue zones of aging and stuff, like a really important part of aging naturally and gracefully is your diet. And we see that these people aren't on fad diets or something
That's right.
outrageous or unconventional. They're actually eating things that are delicious, they're healthy, and they're balanced, So they're
Yeah.
eating things with fat in them, but they're not eating a lot of it, and the fats are all healthy.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really interesting the study of these blue zones, and I talked about that in a couple episodes ago, where I was talking about the mission statement of Natural Health Matters. But they've researchers want to find, well, what are these people eating that's helping them live to 100 plus years? And the truth of the matter is, their diets are all over the place. They have all, some eat nearly vegetarian, some eat nearly Eskimo with lots of fat protein in their diet. So there's really no common denominator there, but except that they eat natural. They eat foods as close to its God-given natural form as they can. A lot of them do their own farming, and one of the more common denominators that you do find is not in diet, but it's the fact that they're relationally connected. They have good relationships. They have a strong community that they surround themselves with. That's one of the more important things when it comes to longevity and aging gracefully. But let's try to stay on topic here. I'm drifting a little bit, but let's stay on topic with skin health here. So, just like we can destroy our gut microbiome with antibiotics, we can do the same with hand sanitizers or antimicrobial soap, also with acne treatments, can we not?
Yes, absolutely. And this is the real shame, all of the anti-acne products out there, whether you talk about antibiotics or benzoyl peroxide or even retinoids like adapalene and Accutane, they all have an antibacterial component. And this reflects the fact that acne is driven primarily by the overgrowth of this one bacteria. But again, just like that rainforest analogy, because they're not specifically killing just the bad bacteria, but they're killing all bacteria on your skin,
Hmm.
it's kind of like setting fire to your microbiome every day that you're using these harsh products. And the result is not just that you'll get these harsh side effects like redness, dryness, irritation. For Accutane, it's worse, like joint pain, liver damage, birth defects, and so on.
Hmm.
But because when you're applying this over and over again, you're depleting your microbiome, you're eroding and stripping away the microbiome from your skin. One of the most common experiences for acne sufferers is having a relapse, right? And what that looks
Yes.
like is you try a product, let's say benzoyl peroxide. It's harsh, but you're really motivated to get rid of your acne. So you apply it, you're seeing some results, so that's great. But after a couple of months, you start seeing a relapse. So it stops working, your acne's back, and you're really distraught because you've spent all this, time, money, emotional energy, and you're back to square one.
Right.
And that's because your skin microbiome has been stripped away so that you don't really have that protective layer anymore. And what's left of your microbiome is, mostly C. acnes, and that's growing back more and more aggressively because there's no part of your skin microbiome holding it back. Those parked cars have disappeared. And so C. acnes is parking more of its cars in you. and spots.
Right.
And unfortunately, for so long, for it's been 40 years, more than 40 years since the last novel acne drug was introduced. Um, Parents are now seeing that when they're looking for acne solutions for their kids, they're really disappointed that there's nothing new. And the same, flawed and crappy acne products that they had to endure as teenagers, they're having to give to their kids. And they're just not okay with that. And so
Hmm.
we have many customers who are parents who come to us and say, hey, my kid has really bad acne, and I'm really kind of at the end of the rope. And I think the next step for us is Accutane, but I was holding out hope and trying to look for something that wasn't as destructive to their body, wasn't as risky and damaging for them. Because you have to be on blood work all the time that you're on Accutane because it can crash your liver. For women, you have to be on birth control even if you're not sexually active because it can cause horrible birth defects. And so no one wants that for their kids. And I think for the first time, we're using microbiome technology to give people a solution that doesn't, cause all of this damage.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about another episode I did with Chris Gibson, and he wrote a book called Acne Free in 3 days, and he did a 3 day fast, and it solved his acne issue, which was really pretty interesting. So if you want to check that out, it's episode number 102. I'll put that in the show notes for sure. So, Dr. Varma, there is a lot of talk today about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. So, what's the difference there? Can you delineate between the three for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics are an important distinction between three categories of ingredients, and they can be confusing. So, the way I think about it is the reason we take probiotics, right, is that these living bacteria are like kind of like living factories, living drug factories. And what they do is they go inside our gut, they live there, and they're right next to our cells in many cases. And what they do is they produce certain molecules that our gut, our body loves. Okay. And these molecules are the reason why we take these probiotics and why they make our system happy, our gut happy. So we know what those probiotics are. They're the living microbiome, microorganisms, which when ingested or applied to our body, have a beneficial effect. Postbiotics are the molecules that they're producing that make our body happy. And prebiotics are certain like foods that we can take that the bacteria, the probiotics really like, and that can promote the growth of the probiotics, right? So I
Hmm.
think of it as, having a fruit tree in your backyard, right? Why do you have the fruit tree? It's primarily because of the fruit it gives, right? So the tree is kind of the probiotic, the fruit that it gives, which is why you have the tree around in the first place, is the postbiotic, right? So you can pluck the
Gotcha.
tree and eat it,
Hmm.
makes your body happy. And the prebiotic would be the fertilizer, the manure, the water that you give it, which selectively helps the tree grow, but doesn't help weeds or the other plants grow.
Yeah.
So if you have probiotics already in your body, but they're in smaller amounts than you want, you can eat probiotics so that encourages existing beneficial bacteria to grow. You can supplement your microbiome with probiotics if you feel like there's not enough good bacteria to begin with. And then some people think, well, the whole reason we're doing all this is because of the postbiotics. So why don't we do an end run around all of this and just eat the small molecules in a pill form?
Right.
The caveat there is, a it's not the same because the bacteria are in the right place at the right time, producing the right molecule in the right quantities, right? And that's not the
Hmm.
same as flooding your system with a certain amount, usually an overdose of a postbiotic. And the second is we've identified some of the molecules that they make that make our body happy, but not all of them. So we don't know what we're missing. And so we might have a good approximation of, the good molecules that make our body happy, but we certainly don't know the full story.
Yeah.
And that's why eating naturally fermented foods is probably the best way to look into
Yeah.
it.
For sure. Well, I tell people that the best way to eat is to eat food as close to its God given natural form as possible because there's so much complexity to foods. I mean, it was only about 80 or 90 years ago that we discovered vitamins. We didn't even know they existed until then. There's probably a whole lot that we don't understand about what's inside of food that yet to be discovered. So when we eat food as close to its God-given natural form as possible, we're giving our bodies a chance to do what they're designed to do, and with the food that we eat, and do what they're supposed to do with their function. Another thing along these lines of delineating between pre, pro, and postbiotics, that is, what's the difference between a digestive enzyme and a probiotic? Because the end result is, well, you have better gut health, right? So people get a little confused there as well. An enzyme, a digestive enzyme, which are contained in many foods, is a catalyst. It's a chemical catalyst in the body, and it helps us break down food. Whereas a probiotic is actually a living bacterial organism that promotes, as you've been saying quite well with the car parking lot analogy, promotes better gut health because of its very presence. So,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in addition to that, it can produce molecules, or metabolize, the food that we eat or the food that's in our gut in different ways that produces beneficial molecules that in most cases our body cannot produce. So we rely on our gut microbiome, for example, to produce a certain class of molecules that make our gut happy, but that our body can't normally metabolize from the food that we eat.
yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a term that a lot of people are using and embracing these days is biohacking, and what you're talking about. Well, if we're looking for the postbiotic, why don't we just make a pill that we can just pop and be on our way? Well, that's the fast food mentality. Everybody wants fast food healthcare. Just I don't want to change anything. I don't want to change my diet or change my lifestyle. Just give me a pill to pop, and away we go. It's just not that simple, is it?
Yeah, and I feel like it's been a feature of the modern Western lifestyle for a long time, which is
Right.
I want a pill for that, right? Doc, give me a pill. I have high blood pressure. I have heart disease. Give me a pill.
Hmm.
Yeah, sure. I'd love for there to be a pill for everything, but um, I think what we learn is having consistent, healthy habits is harder. Doing exercise regularly, even if it's for a short period of time, is
Hmm.
harder. But the benefits that it gives you over popping a statin or a pill, or having fistfuls of pills, as most of us might do, or are forced to do in our later years,
Right.
is the benefit is immeasurably greater.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Another topic I'd like to address right here is our skin is porous, right? I mean, if you are going in for a hormone treatment, the doctor might prescribe a patch that you put on your skin, and it gets absorbed right into the bloodstream through the skin. So it's very porous. So as a result, we should be careful about what we put on our skin. I believe that when people are putting suntan lotion on, a lot of times they're actually intoxicating themselves with known carcinogens that are in that sunscreen because it's getting absorbed right through the skin. And you're better off actually consuming it, eating it, because at least if you swallowed it, you'd have digestive enzymes that would break it down. It would have a chance to go through the liver and be filtered that way before it got to the bloodstream. But when you put something directly on your skin, it gets directly absorbed into the bloodstream without any of that benefit. So, could you speak to that a little bit about how we should be careful about what we put on our skin?
Yeah. There was a study done, I think in Australia, that estimated that the average woman puts 500 skincare ingredients on her skin every single day.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that maybe your skin doesn't need every single one of those 500
Do you
ingredients.
think?
But you think about that, and you're like, even in whatever small quantities or proportions those ingredients are, think about the burden that your skin is under, right? Because you apply many of these products and you leave them on, and your skin is absorbing some of it. Some of it's not absorbing, but certainly sensing.
Yeah.
And then you think, you're doing this every day. You're not doing this, once a year or once a month or once every other while. People have their regimen and they use these products and they move around. But think of the burden that your skin is under, and think of how your in many cases, you can have just better skin health by simplifying your regimen, putting less stuff on your face. And that's really a minimalist ethos that our company, in making our products, embraces as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about hand sanitizers. That's a big topic these days. What do you recommend for if you're not able to wash your hands and you can't get to a sink? What do you recommend to use as a hand sanitizer?
Mm, my view on hand sanitizer is that if you're in like high risk situations, obviously if you work in a hospital or if you're touching surfaces that aren't clean, etc., especially in a post COVID world, then by all means use hand sanitizer when necessary. But if you're at home or working from home or in even in like an office that where it's your own cubicle, and you're just sort of compulsively putting on hand sanitizer every 10-15 minutes, then that is pretty harmful. There was a study out of a hospital that said that overuse of hand sanitizers can really change your microbiome, and it actually tends towards more uh, kind of pathogenic bacteria flourishing over just the general garden variety bacteria. And this was obviously done in a hospital setting where the picking up and transmission of pathogenic bacteria is pretty high, right?
Right,
Because
right.
there's so many patients with so many conditions and diseases coming through.
Mhm.
And so I think again, overuse of hand sanitizer or misuse of it when you really don't need it is something that should be avoided. But of course, like if you're in kind of a high risk setting, hand sanitizer has just much more benefits.
Right,
But
right.
again, judicious use I think is the key.
So that's really interesting. If I heard you right, you're saying that in the hospital situation where people are just routinely, almost mindlessly sanitizing their hands over and over and over, it can actually create an environment that produces more bacterial growth than eliminates it. So the exact opposite effect of what they're hoping for.
And specifically harmful bacteria, yeah. Um,
Hmm.
and again, like if you're kind of a nurse or a caregiver or care provider, nurse, doctor, orderly, etc., then wearing gloves is often, like just part of your PPE, and that's great.
Hmm.
But also, yeah, like regular sanitizing before you're touching the patient and stuff is fine. But for a patient sitting in a ward, right, and just sanitizing their hands over and over again, that's probably not a great use of
Right.
your.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about your product line and what it can do for your skin and how effective it is on acne. I know you had a clinical trial involved. I'd like to hear a few words about that.
Yeah, so I'll start by just talking about the technology that we have, um, and our technology is called bacteriophage technology. So what are bacteriophages? They're tiny, harmless little viruses that are everywhere, and they kill bacteria. They don't really interact with human cells, and they're everywhere. They're in wastewater, they're in seawater, they're in soil, and billions of phages are in our body. So they pass through our body harmlessly every day. Their two superpowers are that they are nature's best defense against bacteria, and that they're also incredibly specific. So one kind of bacteriophage will only kill one bacteria species and not any other bacteria species. So we can really kind of zap the bad bacteria using this technology without hurting anything else. Specifically in the case of acne, there was a study done in 2016 that looked at people with good skin, healthy skin, and people with acne, and try to figure out if their microbiomes had something systematically different between them. They realized and they found that people with healthy skin systematically have a lot of this C. acnes phage, these phage that kill C. acnes on their skin.
Mm.
But in people with acne, their microbiomes just don't have it. And that gives rise to a very interesting idea that, we all have annoying friends who just grew up never having acne, who had amazing skin, but never washed their face, never made the effort, but looked amazing.
Yeah.
Chances are that part of their resistance to acne was the fact that they had these phages naturally on their skin, balancing their microbiome and preventing the overgrowth of C. acnes. And so, we decided to democratize this product. So put it in a bottle so that you may not be born with it, but everyone can have the benefit of this beneficial organism to naturally balance your microbiome and get
Mm.
rid of acne. And so we've done a clinical trial to validate this, showing that not only are they incredibly safe with zero side effects, something that I don't think really any acne product can say. But they balance the microbiome, they reduce the C. acnes, and much more importantly, they have a significant improvement of your acne. So again, keeping with our minimalist ethos, we have only three products: a cleanser, a serum, and a moisturizer. So, the cleanser is a non-foaming, non-stripping cleanser. It's not going to deplete the oils on your face. It has salicylic acid and tea tree oil that really help open up your pores and prepare it to receive the phages. The serum is our hero product, which has our live active phages, which penetrate your pore and start working immediately to kill the C. acnes and balance your microbiome. And finally, we have our moisturizer, which a lot of people with acne have chronically dry skin, and it's a very light kind of whipped cream kind of textured moisturizer, which provides hydration but without the oiliness or stickiness that most people don't like.
Very good.
Simple regimen that everyone can do every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to wrap things up, Dr. Varma, is if you could summarize the most important thing you want people to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
I think in order to maintain skin health specifically, I would say look into your regimen and see if you can simplify it. I think that helps. Drink a lot of water, wear an appropriate amount of sunscreen because sun damage really adds up. And then specifically for acne, a lot of people think that drying out your skin, which a lot of harsh acne ingredients do, but drying out your skin, even by excessively washing, is the key. I'm here to tell you that the root cause is bacterial overgrowth, and while that's related to the oil that your skin produces, there's a lot of benefits to the sebum, the oil that your skin naturally produces. So try not to do that. There is an alternative way, and you can learn about that.
Yeah. I would just caution on the sunscreen is if you are going to use sunscreen, you're going to be out in the sun all day, use a zinc-based sunscreen and don't use the over-the-counter drugstore variety. They're not very good. I like to get my products at FullScript. They have non-toxic body care. I use Desert Essence. And if you're interested in getting some non-toxic body care, such as the Desert Essence line, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/FullScript, create an account, and you'll lock in a 10% discount for life. Dr. Varma, how can people get a hold of you if they're resonating with this message and like to learn more about what you're doing and your product line?
Yeah, we are Phyla, Phyla, and we're on the web at phylabiotics.com. There we have our science, our clinicals, and you can learn more about our technology and make the best decision for yourself. We're also on socials, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., at Phylabiotics. So that's where you can follow us as well.
Spell Phyla.
Phyla.
Okay, very good. Dr. Varma, thank you so much for being on the show today. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Thanks, David. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/125. There you can find links to all the resources that we mentioned. And don't forget, if you'd like to connect with me on a Zoom call, you can find the link there, but you can also go to davidsandstrom.com/coffee talk, all one word, and schedule an appointment with me, and we'll talk via Zoom and have a virtual coffee together. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.